Welcome to our article discussion video. This is Leslie Constant.
And John Tovar.
Our article was Sticks, Stones, and Ideology, The Discourse of Reform in Teacher Education by Marilyn Cochran Smith and Mary Kim Fries in 2001. Public education has been a highly debated topic for some time. One great example of that is the debate over teacher education reform. Within this debate, there are two main agendas, those who wish to professionalize teacher preparation and those who wish to deregulate it. On page 3 of the article, authors report that Professionalizing Stance believes in, quote, high standards for the initial preparation, licensing, and certification of teachers, end quote. So think traditional certification programs and content and pedagogy exams for licensing. Additionally, on page 3, the authors describe deregulators as those who see many college preparation programs and state licensing as red tape and advocate for alternative paths to becoming a teacher. However, Cochran, Smith, and Fry's research question is not to determine which agenda is correct, but rather to explore discourse between these two competing voices. In other words, what are the features of discourse occurring between people on opposite sides of the aisle? In their attempts to study this interaction, the authors collected, quote, public documents, scholarly articles, and transcriptions of public talk, end quote. You can see here a table listing sources which the authors report on page 4 of their article. After analyzing these documents, the authors concluded that discourse between the two sides used three strategies or warrants. On page 3 of the article, these are the evidentiary warrant, the accountability warrant, and the political warrant. In the evidentiary warrant, both sides bolster their position by pointing to empirical data and facts. Their next step is claiming that their side is more empirical than their opponent. Not only do they believe their position is more empirical, they invalidate the other side's data by questioning the objectivity and research methodology. This questioning is very often based in accusations of ideology. This is referred to as the Napoleon move. When Napoleon was seeking out power, he faced opposition from Enlightenment philosophers. Instead of refuting their views with facts, he merely dubbed them as ideologues. In other words, if you are so entrenched in ideology, there are no data or facts you can represent that will be valid because your collection of them is tainted by your ideology. In this particular discourse, both professionalizers and deregulators accuse the other of being biased, while heralding themselves of having the utmost objectivity. The second warrant, the accountability warrant, says that the end justifies the means. In this case, two groups differ in their perspectives of the input versus output. Deregulators say that they are focused purely on end results, i.e. test scores. So it really doesn't matter what goes in, i.e. teacher preparation, as long as student achievement is there. However, professionalizers claim that they too are accountability focused because learning is central to teaching. Therefore, preparing well-trained teachers is outcome focused. The third warrant observed in discourse was the political warrant. This warrant argues that a public good needs to take priority over private and often financial interests. Once again, both sides believe that they represent the public good, while the other side represents private interests. Deregulators view universities and teacher prep programs as giant monopolies that are profiting on the backs of our children. However, professionalizers view producing quality instructors as providing a public good. They also argue that the free market system that deregulators fight for does not result in all children having well-qualified teachers. We believe the statement above best captures the author's findings. They write, given the way each has constructed the problem of teacher education, each side is attempting to persuade others that the solution is obvious and logical, based on a simple common sense and clearly intended for the common good of the public and of American society.
In the increasingly changing economic, social, and political context of our time, a debate around a national reform in teacher education proves to be very complex, nonetheless extremely important and necessary. In the article, The Discourse of Reform in Teacher Education, we could identify that the authors took a constructivist approach. as claim positions are based on two clear perspectives, the professionalization perspective and the deregulation perspective. The authors were not seeking evidence based on theory, but analyzing perspectives. For this study, they reviewed articles, national documents, interviews, and transcriptions of interviews from both national agendas. They used a qualitative method which is consistent with a constructivist approach. Within the constructivist approach, we looked into the ontological position, which the relativity in the article is evident, as the discourse varies distinctly between the two sides and among actors. Tribal meanings and interpretations of the truth can be clearly identified. Professionalizations versus deregulations and their interpretation of the three warrants: evidentiary, political, accountability, plus the interpretation of the other's position. Let us not forget that reality is socially constructed and therefore truth is a relative term. When it comes to epistemology or constructivist epistemology, researchers recognize that objectivity is not possible. They also make a note that they themselves are not objective because they are involved with teacher preparation programs. Let me elaborate a little bit more into this. The authors, they also recognize that meaning and knowledge are created subjectively through the research process when they, as a disclaimer, recognize that they are not trying to pretend that their stance on the debate of teacher education is neutral or apolitical. That comes as a consequence of their involvement as scholars and practitioners in preparing teachers, hinting at some bias. However, they also recognize that they try to do the analysis as even-handed as possible, putting value on some of the most important points on both sides. Their methodology from the constructivist approach, the researchers are studying the interactions between the two perspectives as opposed to finding the truth. In that sense, more than finding the truth in the debate of the two agendas, in the national discussion of our reforming teaching education, the purpose of the study is actually to construct meaning based on the interaction of researcher and actors on both sides. Even though some implicit bias can be perceived, the authors, instead of falling in unnecessary dichotomies between the two agendas, they try to reveal that some of the positions have more in common than previously thought. And at times, it's more one side try to discredit the other side, and vice versa. Since much of the debate is constructed and interpreted by others, we can also notice a conciliatory tone as the context is complex and it matters.